Okay, if I can get your attention back up on stage, we're going to go ahead and get started. Now it's time for a very exciting conversation about rural America's role in the clean energy economy. So please join me in welcoming to the stage our panelists. And our moderator today is Christina Hayes, Executive Director of Americans for a Clean Energy Grid. It's so nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Shall I stand there? Or am I doing here? You get to sit right here. Wait a minute, y'all are coming, right? Okay. Do you want me to sit down? Okay. Thank you, everyone, for being here this afternoon. I know we have the panel right after lunch, so we'll try to keep it a little spicy so that we don't nod off. I'm sure that lunch was terrific, but I also know the consequences of a terrific lunch sometimes can be a little peace and quiet. So in an effort to mix things up, I'm really glad that we're here talking about rural America and clean energy. My name is Christina Hayes. I'm with Americans for a Clean Energy Grid, focused on the high-capacity deployment of transmission around the United States for the most cost-effective and reliable way to decarbonize the grid. We have a great panel here today, and so I want to jump right into it. I'm going to let them introduce themselves and also tell us a little bit about their work and how it is connected to and shows the benefits to rural America. Take it away, Dr. Nick.
Thanks so much. Hi, everybody. My name is Nick Montoni, Dr. Nick Montoni. I serve as the Deputy Chief of Staff at the United States Department of Energy's Office of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy. That's a mouthful. I'm just going to call it EERE from here on out. For those who aren't familiar, EERE is the federal government's largest energy innovation engine, supporting scientists, engineers, technologists, businesses, entrepreneurs, states, tribes, and all kinds of communities in performing the critical research and development needed to bring new technologies to market. Our goal is to make energy more affordable, reliable, and secure for everyone in the United States, regardless of where you live. And if that means also reducing emissions at the same time, then we can get even more return on our investments. When I say regardless of where you live, I really mean it. EERE supports energy technologies, techniques, and tools for all kinds of communities all over the country. Here are a few examples. Our Solar Energy Technologies Office, recently released a program called the Large Animal and Solar System Operations Program. Around 1/3 of the land in our country is used for grazing livestock, primarily cattle. Co-locating solar panels and cattle grazing operations could help preserve agricultural land, provide shade benefits to animals, generate additional income for landowners, farmers, ranchers, and rural communities, and ease barriers to solar energy deployment. The prize offers $8 million in cash awards to teams working together to develop cattle agrivoltaics pilot sites, collect data, and share information. We also have a program called the Renewable Energy Siting through Technical Engagement and Planning Program, or RSTEP. RSTEP works with communities, especially rural communities, who often end up at the forefront of new energy development in order to determine what their needs are and what their preferences are when it comes to siting and building new energy developments. I want to list, I think, two more. Our Wind Energy Technologies Office is working with the U.S. Department of Agriculture to deploy distributed wind systems on farms. That's actually being conducted through the USDA's Rural Energy for America program, which has provided the largest investment in history into wind energy technologies. And finally, I want to make a really big plug for bioenergy. We have recently, or not even recently, we've been making good progress on the Sustainable Aviation Fuel Grand Challenge. Those who aren't familiar, that's our roadmap and plan to produce billions and billions of tons of sustainable aviation fuels to decarbonize aviation. We've seen incredible industry commitment to sustainable aviation fuel, and the roadmap lays out 6 action areas with the potential to make major impact: feedstock innovation, conversion technology innovation, building supply chains, policy and valuation analysis, enabling end use, and communicating progress and building support. Those are really, really important because we are going to, especially the feedstock innovation, We are looking at using new kinds of waste streams and new kinds of feedstock and revenues to support these sustainable aviation fuels, like agricultural waste, like forest residues, things that can create new value streams for rural communities. I will stop there. There's like 5 more programs I wanted to mention, but I feel like I'm running way over time. So
That's a great start. Thank you. Tannice.
Hi, my name is Tannice McCoy, and I'm the president and general manager at NewRange. NewRange is a mining company that's located in Hoyt Lakes, Minnesota. It's in a historic mining district that has over 120 years of taconite mining or iron ore mining. Our project is set to produce copper, nickel, cobalt, and PGMs, all these that are essential for electric vehicles, batteries, and electricity. 70% of our project footprint is actually on a former mine site. And we plan to boost the region's economy as a whole through local procurement, labor, cooperation, and increased tax revenue. So one of the things is this local mine closed down 20 years, having an extreme economic impact into the region. If you can imagine, 1,400 employees were out of work. So bringing this now new mine into production also helps the local economy. Our company has already invested almost $1 billion to bring the project to where it is today. We'll be further investing another $170 million into bringing it hopefully into production, and then construction's another $1 billion. So a large amount of money going into the local communities. And as noted, Northeast Minnesota needs to grow and diversify its economy, and we're there to position it to be a world leader in sustainable resource development and obviously bring the minerals needed for this clean energy transition.
Awesome. Hello, everyone. My name is Chris Barnard. I'm the president of the American Conservation Coalition. We're the largest right-of-center grassroots environmental organization in the U.S. We have over 50,000 members who are 18 to 35-year-olds who identify as conservatives, but also care about environmental issues, climate, clean energy. And as you can imagine, being young conservatives, a lot of them are from rural areas. And I think for a very long time, people in rural areas, people that identify as being on the right of center, have felt alienated from these kinds of conversations. They're not quite sure where they fit into the clean energy future. And I think this is very well exemplified by a trip that I actually took with Congressman John Curtis to his district back in 2020. And he has a county in his district called Carbon County. You can imagine what they do in Carbon County. They have a lot of coal mines. And he took us to visit the local coal community, and they gave us a tour of the mine and kind of talking what they've done, how this has gone back generations. It's been in the family, literally like great-grandfather, grandfather, father, son. Like it's just like through generations they've been involved in this coal plant, but it was shutting down. And what they were telling us was that their biggest export is no longer coal, it's young people. Because a lot of young people in these areas that are either being deindustrialized or their energy sources are being shut down, like you talked about with the mines as well, there's just a sense of economic pessimism, and they don't feel represented in the conversations about what the next stage of energy looks like for their communities. And so a lot of what ACC does is we represent those communities. We go into those communities to talk to them and to say, actually, not only do you have a seat at the table, you might have one of the most important seats at the table. When we talk about clean energy investments in America, the vast majority is happening in rural red districts. These are the districts of the future when it comes to the clean energy that will power the future. But we need to do a much better job at giving them a reason to be at the table, to be excited about this, to maybe find a reason to stay and work in the community and not just leave the community. I think that's what we do. We're particularly excited about this panel to see how rural America can be part of these conversations, and I'm excited for the discussion.
Great, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. I'm John Godfrey. I'm a lobbyist with the American Public Power Association. We are the National Trade Association, which represents the nation's 2,000 state and locally owned electric power utilities. For those who attended the lunch, that includes the large public power utilities, also represented by the Large Public Power Council. We serve roughly 15% of the nation's retail customers and own about 11% of the nation's power generating capacity. our connection to rural America is that roughly 1,600 of those utilities are rural utilities serving a population of 20,000 or less. We also have joint action agencies, which are another form of public power utility, which sells power at wholesale to other, mostly smaller public power utilities. So this all matters for Clean Energy Week because until the Inflation Reduction Act was passed, not one of these utilities could claim energy tax credits for projects they owned. And that meant either buying credit incentivized power from a third party owned facility or projects simply sitting on the shelf when developers and tax equity partners could not be found. So the good news is, as John Descasio discussed earlier, the Inflation Reduction Act changed that with elective payment, which allows tax entities, including public power utilities, to monetize energy tax credits for projects they develop and own. As a side note, this also benefits rural electric cooperatives, which is another form of tax-exempt community-owned utilities. They serve about 13% of the nation's retail customers. So collectively, community-owned utilities serve about 30% of the nation's retail customers. Now, it's too early to say what elective pay will do, and therefore what it will mean for rural communities in the long run. But the near-term effects can already be seen. So, for example, the Indiana Municipal Power Agency is a joint action agency that sells power at wholesale to 60 communities, only 5 of which are not rural. So it's predominantly rural customers. They're building their own solar projects with its own crews, and because of elective pay, it and its predominantly rural customers are keeping every penny of the credits associated with those projects. It also means ACEG, New Mexico. I love this story. ACEG is New Mexico is between Farmington, New Mexico, and Durango, Colorado. It's a town of 6,126 people, home of the Fighting Tigers. It is now in the process of developing its own 2-megawatt solar and storage project. This is a project I cannot imagine would ever have attracted a developer, let alone a tax equity partner, needed to proceed without elective payment. So we're very excited about elective pay. We're very excited about the prospects this brings to rural America and the smaller towns that serve it.
Okay. I really appreciate hearing about how everyone is able to partake in the benefits of clean energy. It sounds like there's really been a focus this time on making sure that the benefits are broadly shared. I've got this two-part question to make sure that we make the best of our time. Given the broad benefits of clean energy to rural America, what are the friction points and how could they be healed? I really, for instance, really appreciate hearing from you, Dr. Moroney, about some of the programs that are, Dr. Nick, some of the programs that are out there to support communities where the resources are being developed. Really excited to hear more about that. And also in places that understand the benefits, what can rural America do to support clean energy? I mean, I think we've been hearing already about the opportunities for both passive and active revenues associated with clean energy and how it can benefit rural America. So why don't we go ahead and, if it's okay, why don't we go with the same litany?
Sure, happy to start. I really appreciate this question because I think it also opens the door to the kinds of questions we should be asking as clean energy experts and developers, which are, what can clean energy do for you? And what does your community need? And what solutions and technologies and tools are right for your way of life? I really want to agree with and echo what the other panelists have said so far and what I think Chris has said specifically about rural communities being at the forefront of the clean energy transition, because I think part of the key here and part of what EERE does best is research and development, right? R&D is so important to our mission, but it's also really important to these broader goals of bringing down energy costs, making energy more secure and reliable, and making energy more accessible to all kinds of communities. And I think that rural communities in particular can serve as really powerful incubators and test beds and amazing partners and validators of the clean energy technologies of tomorrow. A lot of the clean tech that we will need to achieve our goals of lower costs and lower emissions, those technologies have been well developed and proven out in a lab, but we haven't seen how they work at scale in the field, doing small scale field validations. And so I think if we look back to some of the programs that ERE does that I mentioned already, a lot of them are focused on, with appropriate application, with appropriate consent, working with farmers and agricultural communities and rural communities and remote and islanded communities and saying, what are your energy problems and how can some of our emerging solutions be the fix to those problems? And what can we learn in a way that is replicable and scalable from how you all use these technologies? And then we create a value stream and we create buy-in for rural communities to improve their energy systems. And we also, as a larger energy sector, get a lot of information about how these technologies work. And so we sort of get to work in partnership to achieve a much broader set of goals and make our investments in clean energy go much farther.
Sorry, apologies. I think one of the things to bring up is Vice President nominee Tim Walz actually helped shepherd a law in Minnesota saying 100% of the clean energy must be achieved by 2040. But where are we actually going to get the required resources to make this happen? So we're missing infrastructure throughout, throughout the areas. And so bringing in, for me, obviously, bringing in the mines and being able to have that domestically sourced, ethically sourced minerals within the U.S. and particularly in Minnesota, that's there. And bringing awareness, I must say education is very important because I think a lot of people don't actually understand where, you create a solar panel, you have them up, but what actually goes into making a solar panel. And so I think that we lag in industry, particularly in mining, on the education piece, and I think that's somewhere where we can start to heal and bring that on. And another piece is bringing in tribal nations at an early stage. I think they're often a forgotten voice within the industry, and then understanding how they see the impacts to land. So I think, as generally said, there's clear consensus that society will need more mining to be able to hit this transition. And as long as we, work together and ethically and environmentally source these minerals, we'll move forward.
I want to ask you, did you encounter any opposition in terms of raising up the mine, and have you worked with the community, and what has their reaction been?
So the mine's not in operation right now, to be clear,
okay.
sorry. I probably should have stated they're projects. We are a mining company with 2 projects. We've received incredible local support throughout the time. So we've been in the permitting process for over 12 years, which is, hence all the money that's been spent to date. So we've received incredible support. Obviously, we have communities that lost 1,400 jobs 20 years ago. They've watched, they're the lowest in the state of Minnesota for actually their income as of right now. So obviously, they're looking for jobs. They're looking to bring their communities back up to where they were. They've lost their stores, and they can't even get groceries locally. So this is there. What I will say is, there wasn't enough tribal engagement before, and when we came in as NewRange over our predecessor company, it was one of the biggest values we brought in, is to be able to sit back, listen, and take their concerns into the actual process to be able to make the project the best it can be.
Terrific. I heard tribal engagement, I heard communicating the benefits of your project, and I heard we need siting and permitting reform yesterday.
Yes.
Did I get that list
Yeah,
right?
that's pretty good, yeah.
Terrific. Chris?
Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts on this particular topic, so I'll try and distill as much as possible. But to go back to the story about when I went to the coal mine in Utah, I think there's a little bit of a misconception that people like in coal communities are just desperately trying to buck the clean energy transition and are refusing to be a part of it. But actually, in conversation with those people, they very much want to be part of the solution. They just feel like they are not being given that opportunity. And at this coal community in Utah, one of the big things that they were focusing on was carbon capture technology, which they felt would allow their community to once again be relevant in America's energy landscape. But they were kind of coming into opposition with environmentalists who see carbon capture as just a way to perpetuate fossil fuels, or just a lack of support from the federal government or R&D grants, and so they feel very much, again, left out of that conversation. I think similarly, for those of you who are from rural parts of the country, you know that people in rural areas don't like being told what to do. And this is particularly important in the energy conversation because, like I said, they want to be part of the solution, but they don't want to be forced into something someone in DC tells them to do or in the state government tells them to do. And a really good example of this was in Colorado. Colorado has a lot of coal mines, for example, in places like Pueblo, and some of those coal mines are shutting down for either regulatory reasons or economic reasons. And so again, those communities are looking for what's the next thing? How can they be part of this? One of the solutions that was brought forward was, oh, maybe we can retrofit these coal mines to have small modular nuclear reactors. And so the Colorado State Legislature had a proposal to do a feasibility study on what that could look like, and that was killed by environmentalists because they don't think that nuclear is apparently clean energy enough for them. And so now that community will very likely just not have an energy presence because they're, for some reason or another, not able to do wind or solar, and so all of a sudden they're shut out of the conversation altogether, but they're desperate for potentially a nuclear reactor to come in there. I think some parts of the country are doing that well. So West Virginia lifted their moratorium on nuclear reactors, partly because they have so many coal mines that could be retrofitted, right? 3/5 of the skills of a worker in a coal mine can be transferred to working at a nuclear plant. Like, that's workforce. Like, if you're talking about a just transition, there's nothing more just than allowing a community that's being left behind to actually have a stake in that future. Other states like Montana is doing a feasibility study. Wyoming, the Bill Gates nuclear plant is being brought to Kemmerer, again, a coal community. And so I think really when it comes to this, we need to be working with those communities, not just telling them what to do. And I think that's the way that we have them be a part of these conversations.
Appreciate that. There seem to be so many opportunities for innovation. Transmission lines, for instance, between Wyoming and Utah and California allow the solar to flow when it's running and the coal to burn when the when the sun is not out. And so in that way, the coal actually appears cleaner because the coal and the solar balance each other out. So having transmission lines to balance out resources around the country bring broad benefits and bring clean energy to all communities.
Yeah, and another quick point about that what they're so frustrated by is they feel vilified. And it was funny because the coal miners in Utah were telling us that actually one of the only times that they can ramp on the coal plant again to produce energy is when California has blackouts and they need energy to come into the grid because of some of the crazy things they're doing there. And so there's a lot of hypocrisy going on in this conversation. And again, if you're vilifying the very people that are trying to just make a living and provide the electricity, again, they're not wedded to it having to be cold. They're just wanting to make an honest living and be a part of the solution and not being told that they're evil people for what they're doing.
Totally fair. John?
Yeah, thank you. So I think there's 3 hurdles: access, public opinion, and domestic content. Access we talked about. Again, the Inflation Reduction Act now allows these rural communities to own the generation, receive the incentives that others had gotten previously. So I think that's huge. So I think we've already solved that problem. Check. Second is public opinion. We talked about there's this perception that rural America is where you put the generation that other people own. Again, I think the solution is elected pay. This gives us an opportunity for rural America to be the place where we own our generation. Again, we can own and operate facilities and join in the benefits of this transition into a diversified generation portfolio, whether it be wind, solar, nuclear, biogas, geothermal. I think that the opportunities are rife, so that's great. And the last one, domestic content, that sounds a bit like a bit of a non sequitur. We talked a bit about the bonus that using domestic content provides for these energy credits, but for public power and co-ops, you have to use domestic content to get elective pay. That's not a big issue. We want to do it. There's supply chain issues in the near term. The question being is how are the rules, regulations, and red tape associated with that? And so we've not yet seen final rules there. I am concerned that projects that would otherwise be viable might not proceed because we don't have simple, clear, and reliable rules. So there's a real opportunity. Treasury, by the way, an advertisement, Seth Hansen is talking in the next panel. They've done a great job in working on this, but we've not yet seen the other shoe in terms of domestic content requirements. So greatly appreciate the work we've done to date, but that's really one of the big question marks out there about this transition. Again, I think it'll be huge for rural America if we can have simple, clear, reliable rules for building our own generation.
You bring up some good points. I hope you don't mind. I'm going to ask you a little bit more about what you said. So I hear a lot about folks wanting to kind of focus inward. You know, we have enough energy for our state, whereas in other kinds of industries, commodities, for instance, a lot of places in rural America benefit by exporting. There seems to be sort of a disconnect on how that works in the energy world. How can we make sure that rural America feels like they are benefiting when they do provide surplus that is able to be shared broadly?
So I think that's a really good question. I mean, again, if, and I'll use my dumb restaurant analogy, which is if everyone at the table is eating and I'm on the outside looking in, I might get a little skittish. But if I can own some of that, either directly be a co-owner of a facility, that's awesome. So developers, please let us be co-owners of facilities, or own my own smaller project. I think I get less concerned about what's happening at that table, and we can all realize that we're all getting ahead. But when things are happening, when a project is othered, if I can use that term, it gets easier to be more resentful. But if it's an us proposition, we've all got some stake in the game. I think the value of exporting energy as a way of bringing money into the community, you can start to appreciate that.
To make sure that the rising tide lifts all boats. Sounds like terrific.
And it does. Again, the previous panel, I think it made a really good point that these projects do benefit. It's hard to perceive that when you don't have an ownership stake.
Totally fair. I wanted to ask Chris, your organization has been doing a lot of research recently that raises the question of what do you think would be helpful for rural America to know about clean energy? I'm hopeful you can talk about this, and then others can also add. Maybe we can have a little bit of an advertising campaign developed here. If you could provide one sentence or a tagline to communicate the value of your work and clean energy to rural America, what would it be? Chris, I'd like to start with you.
Yeah, so like I mentioned, the organization that I represent works a lot with young conservatives across the country, and often those young conservatives are in rural communities. And so we did a poll recently that sampled rural Americans, oversampling young conservatives in these areas to see how they think about clean energy in the future and all this. And I have my phone up here because I want to make sure I get the numbers right. But some of the interesting things that we found were 71% of young rural conservatives support transitioning to clean energy, so kind of an overwhelming number in favor of that. 73% say that they want to help combat climate change, so kind of along similar lines there. A plurality see clean energy as an economic opportunity for their community, but at the same time, the number one worry about this future is whether it would be economically beneficial to their community. So it's really important to communicate that it is actually an opportunity for them and will create jobs and economic opportunity. At the same time, only 39% of young rural conservatives feel like the rest of the country, the elected leaders, are willing to listen to them on energy and environmental issues. So again, to my point earlier, they feel like they're vilified, they feel like they're outside of this conversation, and that the people that are making decisions on their behalf are not taking their concerns into account. In terms of how to brand this and how to message this, it's quite interesting. I was at Climate Week yesterday, and we did an event with the CEO of GE Vernova. GE Vernova's technology supplies 25% of the world's electricity. It's just mind-boggling. And we were talking about how actually one of the best things that you can be doing is to lean into a patriotic angle for clean energy. It's like, again, people want to be part of the solution. They want to be building something creative that they feel is not just good for them, but also good for the country. And it's really fascinating talking, again, to fossil fuel communities, especially oil and gas communities. So there's a real sense of pride that they helped industrialize America. They helped us win 2 world wars, put a man on the moon, invent the internet, win the Cold War. There's a sense of pride that they allowed us to do that. They powered us to do that. And in the 21st century kind of competition with China, the AI arms race, kind of where clean energy is going, I think there's a similar opportunity to lean into that patriotic angle of like, yeah, America put a man on the moon, we put the internet in the palm of our hands, and now we can like tackle climate change and come up with clean energy and beat China at that. I think there needs to be a deeper, inspiring, patriotic message beyond we're just creating electrons without emissions. Like electrons without emissions is factual but extremely boring. And for people that actually want to be a part of this, they want to build something that is furthering their community, furthering their country, and be a part of a solution. And I think we can do a lot more to lean into that patriotic angle. And when you talk to people across the country, one of the things that they're most worried about is our over-reliance on China when it comes to this stuff. And amazingly, it's what unites people who care about climate change and like base Republican voters the most. Like upwards of 80% of Americans are worried about this reliance on China, and you can get them excited about a clean energy future by talking about the way that we compete with China and beat China. I think that's an extremely powerful message, and that's one that we should be taking to these communities.
Appreciate that. Who wants to take it next?
I can go. So I believe that the energy transition is more than just generation of energy. It's, strong union jobs. It's creating new opportunities in economically depressed areas and building crucial domestic supply chains as you come up on a patriotic.
Sure, I'll jump in. So I really appreciate this question. In DC, if you're explaining, you're losing. So forcing me to really think about in one sentence how it would get put across, I greatly appreciate. So here we go. The American Public Power Association is working in support of elective pay energy tax credits to build locally owned, locally controlled, diverse generation portfolios to serve communities, small and large.
Great, I'll go last. We're working to make energy more affordable, reliable, and accessible for and with Americans in all kinds of communities.
I feel like
I want your tagline.
I feel like I kind of missed the one sentence memo. I launched in a little bit of a monologue. But
Actually, I have one for you,
Okay.
if that works. I
Yeah.
was hoping to close
Great.
it out. Do you have one?
No,
You wanna
no,
go ahead?
by all means.
So one of the things that we talk about, and I have transmission jewelry and everything I want to share with you at the end. America needs a grid to power America. That transmission is really the piece that ties it all together. It's what makes all of the generation resources complement each other. The diversity of generation helps keep costs down so we don't have to over-procure. It's what keeps it affordable. It provides an all-of-the-above solution. Some of the things that we're working on related to siting and permitting, and I'll be honest, I'll be selfish for a minute. I worked for Farm Bureau before going to law school about 100 years ago. I think there were like mules pulling rows, with that in mind, we've really looked at the importance of siting multi-state, multi-region transmission lines, and a lot of times that happens in rural America. There's the idea of like, where's my power going? But it needs to be done in a way that is mindful, respectful, working with landowners and communities to make sure that they see the benefit of that. So Americans for Clean Energy Grid commissioned a report that came out in February of last year that highlights some of the needs to site transmission well, working with rural communities in particular. We're currently developing fact sheets that we want to share with rural and agricultural landowners and communities. What do you do when somebody knocks on your door and says, I would like to site resources here? There are a lot of tools available to make less of an impact on rural communities while still enjoying in the benefits. And also we have a report coming out that involved facilitation among rural and agricultural interests, as well as developers, as well as tribal entities and others, as to what should a developer know when they go out to the community to make sure that they have that both sides know sort of what they should be able to expect to develop resources well. So we're very excited about those and seeing greater development of all kinds of energy in rural America for the benefit of rural America as well. This has been the most succinct, brief, well done panel, which means we have tons and tons of extra time. So I can't wait to hear the questions that those in the audience have for us and to see if there are any of those that have come in over the interwebs. Okay, I know lunch was good, but hopefully we've like kept everybody awake, spiced up. What do you think? What questions do you wish I'd asked?
I think we have 2 questions, actually.
Oh, a brave soul. Terrific.
Yeah, hi. So my name is Ben. I'm at SMI, a government relations firm, and I work with a lot of clean energy and battery technology clients. Chris, I kind of had a question for you. Now, somebody, personally, I'm a bit kind of left of center, but I'm kind of curious, like, how do you even like approach these kinds of conversations? Like, how do you get these kinds of people talking? Because, I think that we can all kind of agree, like, as much as there are things we disagree on, like, there really is more that unites us than divides us as Americans. And so I'm kind of curious, like, how, you kind of get that conversation started.
Yeah, I won't lie. Sometimes the messenger is more important than the message. And that's something that I feel like we're able to uniquely do when we're talking to these communities, because often they're going to be somewhat skeptical of industry coming and talking to them, or they're somewhat skeptical of like a climate group coming in and talking to them. But if we come in and say, look, we share the same worldview, we have the same values, and let's talk about first principles and go from there, they're much more willing to engage on that. And I think there's, like you said, there's more that unites us than divides us. And everyone wants to be able to put a meal on their family's plate and a roof over their head and provide. Everyone wants to be a productive member of their community. Everyone wants to protect the environment. Like, it's a bit of a culture war issue when it comes to things like climate or whatever it might be. But at the end of the day, if you ask someone if they want clean air, clean water, thriving wildlife, and a beautiful kind of America to pass on to future generations, you'd like be kind of insane to disagree with that, right? But so you need to speak their language, and you need to be seen as having that emotional credibility with them. And so a lot of what we do is say, look, we know you don't feel heard. We know that you feel vilified and left out of this conversation. But here's a way for you to be a part of this. And we've done that with like coal miners, with fossil fuel workers, with like former miners, like people that across this country feel like they're not a part of this conversation but want to be. And we give them a way in. But I really think it starts like by connecting at a human level. And again, like at the end of the day, it's kind of difficult to do that if you don't share that personal relationship with them and that same way of looking at the world. And I think that's why you need like groups like ACC to be able to talk to those kinds of people.
I have a question for Dr. Nick. Can you talk a little bit about what the Department of Energy is doing in terms of geothermal sources of energy in rural areas, specifically, say there were oil and gas wells, and revitalizing them for those sources of energy?
I would love to talk about this because we're doing quite a bit, actually. I think maybe the first thing to point out is that unless I'm terribly mistaken, our Geothermal Technologies Office, which is an office within EERE, actually has a workforce development program that's focused on transitioning fossil fuel workers and helping them making the connections between fossil fuel skills and the skills needed to run a geothermal plant or drill a geothermal well. A lot of those skills are complementary and overlapping, and so we think there's a really huge opportunity as we phase workers out of the fossil fuel industry when needed. There is an industry for them to move into with a similar skill set. I think specifically, our geothermal office has what's called we have a community heating and design deployment program, which focuses mainly on rural communities. Let's see, they announced the selection of 11 of these communities last April, and I'll give you an example of one of them. It's Shawnee, Oklahoma, with the lead being the University of Oklahoma. It's a combined solar and geothermal heat pump heating and cooling system, and it's being demonstrated in a community owned and operated by I think the Shawnee Nation. So that's just one example of the kind of work that the Geothermal Technologies Office does in rural communities.
We want everyone back home watching to be able to hear.
Getting your steps in.
Hi, my name's Jeff. I'm a student, and when I think of rural areas, especially the West U.S., and especially tribal areas. You know, I've heard a lot about, I mean, there's been a lot of mention of like transmission and the importance of that. But what I think about is off-grid, and I think about distributed energy and microgrids and storage. And I think that, you know, in rural areas in the U.S., you know, there's opportunity for being models for, you know, for islands, for developing countries, for, you know, just very rugged, you know, places, and for that matter, for the military in a tactical sense. I just wondered if there were any thoughts, you know, in that direction.
Yeah, that's a really good question. Again, I think there's lots of small towns in the U.S., and you may not know it, but we're all microgrids, right? There's probably one substation that serves the entire town. Oftentimes, there's an existing diesel power plant, 5 to 10 megawatt peaker plant of some sort. So it already is sort of a microgrid. Building out distributed generation within these locations, inside the meter projects like you're talking about, I think is a great opportunity. Again, you can have these islands of generation where they're operating with their own system. Secretary Granholm had talked about this earlier. Again, it's a kind of beating a horse here in terms of electric pay. Right? It's a great way to get a town to build its own generation because we will need huge amounts of new transmission. In the meantime, if we could fill out some of that, if you could meet some of that new demand with distributed generation, that's a great way to take some of that initial pressure off of the grid in terms of build out. So yeah, I think there's some great opportunities, and we've got some great tools in hand to make that happen. Can I
weigh in a little bit? Yeah, great. Sorry, I'll try to be quick. So, you know, the Department of Energy does a lot of microgrid work. I could point you to the Microgrid Design Toolkit. I don't believe that's an EERE program, but I want to give it a plug. The EERE work that I will plug for is the Energy Transitions Initiative. It is now in its 4th year and its 4th cohort. It's a program that focuses on providing technical assistance and decision support to rural, remote, and islanded communities. So these are communities who are facing a particular location-based energy challenge, like they're on an island and not well connected to the grid. In a lot of cases, the solution for them is, how do we set up a microgrid for you? Or how do we set up a co-located generation and storage for you? And it's a really wonderful program. There's, I think, somewhere between 20 and 30 communities selected for this program every year. So we now have a pretty large cohort. I don't have any examples of communities that have established a microgrid right now in front of me, but I'm fairly certain a few of them have. So I'm happy to point you towards some of those resources if you're interested.
I just want to throw out another perspective, and granted, I am the transmission person here, so this is in my best interest, but in fairness, I want to provide a different point of view. Who here has ever been to an island? Let's start there. Like, been to Hawaii, right? Is it expensive or is it cheap? Kind of expensive, right? Where you're able to optimize costs, where you're able to have, you know, the best priced generation with the, you know, the right price for transmission, where you balance all that out, that a lot of times can get you to a good answer. There are those who would like to, you know, only build generation in their, you know, town. Like, I've taken care of myself. That can be the most expensive way to do it. And also then, you know, you have challenges if something were to go wrong with that particular plant. And so microgrids are a great solution in some places and for some purposes, and there's definitely a use for it. I also used to work in the utility world, and so managing those and also being able to deploy them for, you know, general use when there's not an emergency. So, you know, integrating them into the broader system is very important, but it's not the last answer. It's not the only answer. Sorry, I just got to get my 2 cents in.
Well, and I'd agree completely.
Appreciate that. Thanks. All right, we're at 45 seconds. Is there one more? All right.
Speed round.
Hi there. This is Rhiannon Scanlon from R Plus Energies. We're a renewable energy company based out of Salt Lake City, Utah. We actually have an 80 megawatt solar plant in Carbon County. It's perceived well by the community, but as we look towards the west, these states, Nevada, Utah, have a lot of federal managed land. And what I'm hearing in these rural, small town communities is that the renewable energy industry is kind of going after a land grab. These lands were used for grazing, mining, recreation, these traditional uses, and that does not include renewable energy. So I'm wondering if you have any idea to kind of move that conversation forward.
Great question.
I feel like I'm being pressured into answering this. It's a great point. I think a lot of people do feel that concern that there is like a land grab and that otherwise productive land for other purposes is now being kind of forced into like creating renewables. I kind of think a lot about Texas in these situations. Like there's a lot of ranch land in Texas, right? But Texas also is the country's largest producer of wind energy. And one of the reasons they're so successful is because farmers don't see wind as like their part in climate action. They see a wind turbine and they see dollar signs, right? Because they're able to like site these on their land and make it work with the grazing and with the electricity production. And so I think we need to be creative about finding that right balance and what those trade-offs are between like mining on lands or grazing or whatever, or recreational purposes, right? And energy production. I think that requires strong community input. And I also think some of it is about, again, not forcing it on people, but having that conversation about here are what these potential economic benefits could be for you, and let's come together and find a way to make this actually happen. And I think it's not an either or, right? Like you're able to have both of those, but you just need to have community conversations. So I think with the -2 minutes that we have, that's probably the best I can do, but hope it's helpful.
Co-location and passive revenue are terrific opportunities for rural America. Thank you, all of you, for joining us today to talk about the role of clean energy in rural America.
Well, that was a great discussion about the next generation and where we're moving in rural America. Thank you all to our panelists. And we're going to keep the program moving right along.